When I was younger, I had a doll that my grandmother had given me for my 5th birthday. It was one of those old-fashioned porcelain dolls with painted blue eyes, curly blonde hair, and a dress made of lace. My parents thought it was a charming, precious heirloom from my grandmother's childhood, but from the moment I laid eyes on it, I felt an inexplicable sense of unease. I tried to like the doll, I really did. I placed it on a small chair in the corner of my room, right next to my bookshelf. But no matter where I moved it, I always felt as if its glassy blue eyes were watching me, following me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. My parents told me I was just being silly, that it was just a doll and couldn't hurt me. So I kept it in my room, hoping I'd get used to it. But that never happened. At first, it was little things. I'd go to sleep with the doll on the chair, but when I woke up, it would be in a different position. Sometimes it was leaning against the bookshelf. Other times, it was lying on the floor. I tried to convince myself that I must have moved it in my sleep, maybe knocked it over while tossing and turning. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, a few weeks after the doll arrived, I woke up feeling unusually thirsty. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make too much noise, and padded down the hallway toward the kitchen. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I paused, suddenly gripped by a strange sensation, like I was being watched. The kitchen was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the clock on the microwave. I reached for a glass, but as I turned to the sink, I froze. There, lying on the counter, was the doll. Its blue eyes stared up at me, wide and unblinking, its small hands posed as if it had been reaching for something. I hadn't brought the doll downstairs. I was certain of that. My parents had gone to bed hours ago, and they never touched the doll. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at it, too terrified to move. How had it gotten there? Suddenly, I felt a forceful shove from behind, and I was sent sprawling to the ground, the glass shattering beside me. I gasped in pain, my hands stinging from where the shards had cut into my skin. But the pain was secondary to the fear coursing through me. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I looked around the dark kitchen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when I heard the sound, the whispers, soft, almost inaudible, but unmistakably real. They came from all around me, echoing off the walls, filling the room with a suffocating sense of dread. The words were garbled, like a language I couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably sinister. I backed away, my heart racing, and as I did, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, moving across the floor upstairs, toward my parents' bedroom. But there was no one upstairs except my parents, and they were sound asleep. The realization hit me like a cold wave. The footsteps weren't theirs. I bolted out of the kitchen and up the stairs, my mind a blur of fear and confusion. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were coming from just behind me. I could feel something cold and malevolent breathing down my neck, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I burst into my parents' room, flinging the door open with enough force to make it bang against the wall. "Mom! Dad! I cried, my voice trembling. I ran to their bed and shook them awake, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline. Something's in the house. It's the doll. My parents groggily sat up, blinking in the darkness. My mother reached for the lamp on her bedside table and flicked it on, flooding the room with light. My father rubbed his eyes, clearly struggling to wake up. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "The doll," I stammered. "It was in the kitchen and something pushed me and I heard whispers." My parents exchanged a glance. My mother placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, her expression softening. "Honey, it was just a bad dream," she said gently. "The doll is probably still in your room. Let's go back to bed, okay?" But I shook my head furiously. "No, I'm not making it up. I'm telling the truth." My father sighed, getting out of bed. "All right, let's go check the kitchen," he said, clearly not convinced, but willing to indulge me. "We'll take a look, and then we can all go back to sleep." The three of us made our way down the hallway, my parents moving at a much more relaxed pace than I was. I clutched my mother's arm, my eyes darting around the dark corners of the house, expecting something to leap out at us at any moment. The whispers had stopped, but the house felt charged, like the air before a storm. We reached the kitchen, and I pointed to the counter where I'd seen the doll, but to my horror, it wasn't there anymore. The counter was empty, save for the shattered glass on the floor. I felt my stomach drop, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? No, I couldn't have. The pain in my hands was real enough. My father sighed, bending down to pick up the larger pieces of glass. "See? There's no doll here. You probably knocked over the glass in your sleepwalking." "I wasn't sleepwalking," I insisted, frustration and fear bubbling up inside me. "I saw it. It was right there." My mother knelt beside me, examining the cuts on my hands. "Let's get you cleaned up," she said softly, "and then we'll go back to bed. You'll feel better in the morning." But as she spoke, something in the room shifted. The temperature dropped and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. My parents seemed to notice it too, their expressions changing from concern to confusion. Then the whispers returned. This time they were louder, more insistent, and they were accompanied by a new sound, a soft, shuffling noise, like something dragging across the floor. My father stood up, looking around the room, his expression hardening. "What in the world?" he muttered under his breath. The shuffling grew louder, coming from the hallway now. My parents and I turned as one, and there, in the doorway, was the doll. It stood upright, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its blue eyes gleaming in the dim light. The doll's mouth, which had always been a simple, painted line, seemed to be twisted into a malicious grin. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while my father took a step back, his face pale. For a moment, none of us moved, too shocked to react. Then, as if by some unspoken agreement, we all moved at once. My father lunged for the doll, grabbing it by the arm. The doll's head snapped around to face him, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I thought I saw its eyes narrow in anger. He carried it to the basement door, my mother and I following close behind. My father yanked open the door and descended the creaky wooden stairs, the doll dangling limply in his grasp. He reached the bottom and threw the doll into an old storage trunk that had been sitting in the corner for as long as I could remember. He slammed the lid shut, locking it with a padlock that was rusty but functional. My mother had to practically drag me up the stairs, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. The whispers had stopped, and the house felt eerily quiet, but the fear lingered like a bad taste in my mouth. Once we were back upstairs, my parents tried to reassure me, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They didn't know what to make of what had just happened, and neither did I. All I knew was that the doll was locked away in the basement, and I hoped I would never have to see it again. We all slept in the same room that night, the lights on and the door firmly closed. None of us spoke about what had just happened, and I could tell my parents were struggling to process it. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to close my eyes. Every creak of the house made my heart race, and every shadow seemed to hold some unseen threat. The next morning, my father nailed the basement door shut. "Just to be safe," he said with a strained smile. We didn't talk about the doll again, not even as the years passed and I grew older. The basement became a forbidden place, a part of the house we avoided at all costs. Even when my friends came over, I would make excuses not to go down there. Eventually, we moved to a new house, and the old one was sold to another family. I never asked what happened to the doll. I didn't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I would wake up with a start, convinced that I could hear those whispers again, just at the edge of my hearing. And in my nightmares, the doll was always there, staring at me with those cold, blue eyes. Hope you enjoyed that story, and I'll see you in the next one. See you on the flip side.